Hi, and welcome to the Great Awakening podcast. I'm your host, Giselle Brunn, and today's special guest is Bridget Finklaire, author, spiritual teacher, and founder of the Bone Circle. Welcome, Bridget.
Thank you so much, Giselle. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to see you. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm really glad you came. It's wonderful to have you from South Africa all the way here with us today. And please do tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, and how you got into what you're doing now and the services that you provide.
Thank you so much. Okay, so, I'm getting a little bit long in the tooth now, so it's a long story. There's a lot that's happened in my life. But I think many people who are on a spiritual path and are part of this great awakening have some kind of challenge in their life. Either they had challenge when they were a child, or they had a health challenge. I know you had a big health challenge, or they had something that challenged them that woke them up to it. And I was no exception, really. My challenge was in my childhood. I didn't have any physical abuse or anything like that in my childhood, but I had a pair of parents who were really quite self-absorbed and narcissistic. They wanted to do their own thing. They were hugely entertaining and charismatic, and everybody thought they were wonderful, but they weren't really very nurturing in terms of parenting. And this, if you go through that kind of experience, it does leave you with scars. And those scars start normally to show later in life, because I just thought it was normal. Everybody's life was like that. And then when I was older, I went to London. I'm from England, although I live in Cape Town, South Africa. I'm actually from the UK. So I went up to London in my 20s, and that's really when I started to feel maybe things are a little bit different in my childhood. So if I fast forward to when I was 30, I had my own children. I got married and I had my daughter. And then you start to really think about parenting and motherhood. And I started to think, hey, hang on. I think there's a few things going on with me that are not quite right. And that set me on this path. But it was a dual path, and it was always this dual path. So on the one hand, there was kind of therapy and counseling and psychotherapy and understanding what had happened to me and how I could resolve that and forgive my parents and still have a good relationship with them. And on the other hand was the spiritual path. And I guess the spiritual path had been there all along, because I think that's what happens to souls that choose to go on a spiritual path. Things happen right from the early stages. There are little breadcrumbs, if you like, that you follow, little signs that you're going to wind up being on a spiritual path. And that came much more into the fore because I wasn't working. I'd given up work to look after this baby. So all of a sudden you're not on that. And this was, when I'd gone through the 80s and this was the 90s, and it would, that whole kind of work and career and all of that stuff. And you don't stop to think, there might be something that's not quite right here. But when I actually finally stopped to have kids, I realized, no, I need to do this work. So I took this dual path of both the spiritual path and the kind of therapy path. And then I had my son and went deeper into the spiritual side of life. I actually started off doing a lot of work with feng shui and houses and space clearing. So I used to do energy clearings and things like that. And that kind of evolved eventually into me clearing sites and clearing the earth energies and clearing all sorts of weird and wonderful things, ghost busting, all sorts of stuff like that. So I kind of went into that. And at the same time, I realized I needed to do more on my own sort of psyche, on my inward journey. And so I trained as a therapist, actually trained as a brief solution-focused therapist and hypnotherapist, and then an advanced hypnotherapist, and then a trauma therapist, and it went on. So I kind of had this journey. And again, always the spiritual path was there, and I was also training to be a Reiki healer, a Reiki master, and then various different healing modalities that I did along the way, and then sacred geometry and Merkaba and all sorts of books that I read and courses that I went on. And living in London at the time, there was a lot of people that you could go and see speak. So I had this kind of very, very alternative path, and then this quite mainstream therapy path. And eventually I've tried to keep them separate, but you can't in the end, because everything's all one, as you know. So eventually I brought those two together, and I was working in London's Harley Street at the top of my career. And it's difficult being a therapist when you're dealing with people who've got very, deep challenges. Maybe they've got very traumatic childhoods where they did have physical abuse or sexual abuse, or or they've got addictions, or they've got eating disorders, or they've got all kinds of what I would call hole in the soul. And I loved those clients. They were interesting for me, and I really loved to see them change and to feel that I was doing something to help somebody really make a change in their life, positive change. But it's also draining. So I wanted something else to do that was not so draining. And that's where I brought together these two parts of me, because I actually created a course, which is, a lot of people are doing it now, but in those days, nobody was doing it. I created it myself. I created a little sort of 6-week course for women who couldn't get pregnant. So they might have had IVF and it failed. They might have had miscarriages, but for whatever reason, they couldn't get pregnant. And often those reasons were unclear. So they would come to see me, and I would start by working with a bit of hypnosis and take them back and do regression work. I would look at trauma work to clear up the trauma of the losses that they suffered and the misery that they were in, and try to shift their attention. And then I'd also do hands-on healing, energy healing with them to clear whatever was going on. Often there's past life stuff and things like that. And often you don't want to get into that. You just need to look at what's going on energetically in the body. So I would merge all these things together. So that's kind of where I was at when I then left London. So sorry, it's a long answer here. I'm trying to cut it down and make it a bit shorter,
okay.
make sure it's interesting for people who are listening. But I went through a very, very acrimonious divorce from my ex-husband. It really got nasty. I'm convinced that he decided to make my life as difficult as he possibly could, and he's never spoken to me since.
Wow.
So that pushed me into a corner, and I burnt out. Not for the first time, but this time was a serious burnout. And I was trying to look after 2 teenage children, look after my clients, run my business, and deal with this person who wanted to just make life difficult, and having to go through the lawyers and all of that sort of thing, and having to earn enough money to pay the mortgage or the bond on the house, and it was crazy. And I got very sick. I had a gallstone. I went into hospital, into A&E, and the doctor looked at me and he said, "You are so stressed out. If you continue, you're going to be very sick. You could kill yourself, at your age."
Yeah.
I was in my late 40s then, and I couldn't stop. I had kids to look after. Yeah. You had to put food on the table. I had to put a roof over their head. I had clients that were long-term, that needed to see me. So I couldn't stop, and I kept going. I kept going for another 3 years.
Wow.
I sold the house. Divorce went through. I moved to an apartment in London. I looked after my kids, and I carried on. And then at the beginning of 2012, I did a training to tap into my intuition. I've always been intuitive, but I think the problem is we don't always listen to our intuition, or we do listen to it, but it's too scary to act on it. So I actually went onto a training where you could tap in at will to your intuition to create from that intuitive knowing. So you had a true north to go by. You could work with your sat nav then and kind of create what you want. And what came out for me in that session, I nearly didn't do the training because I was exhausted and I thought I can't take on anything else. But I did do it. I knew it was true to do it. We have these absolute knowings, and we were guided all the time, of course, by what I would say is upstairs. Our spiritual guides and angels are there guiding us, and our own intuition and our own overself and higher self. And I absolutely knew I had to do this training. And then it started in January, and sort of quickly by February, I knew Africa was somewhere in the thing, and I thought it was metaphoric. I thought it was just a metaphor for having a more colourful life. And I carried on working with this thing, and it was a 9-month training. And then it became obvious that no, I was going to leave my job in Harley Street, which was very scary because I'd spent, 8 years building up my profile, building up my career as a really top therapist in England, and then had to kind of give it up at the height of my career with waiting lists and all sorts of stuff. It felt suicidal. But I did, and thank goodness I did, because it was a 6-month period that I had to give notice for the room, which I rented. The overheads were very expensive. I couldn't afford to not work and continue with that room. And by the time that 6 months had finished, I was so completely burnt out that I couldn't really see clients anyway. So it was absolutely right to do that. And by the time that 6 months had passed, became obvious it wasn't just a metaphor about Africa, and it wasn't even just me coming on a holiday to Africa. I was being called, because I do think we have callings. I was being
Yes.
called. I was absolutely being called to come to South Africa. I have to tell you, Giselle, it's a country I had never stepped foot in my life. I had never
Wow.
been here. I knew a couple of people who were from South Africa who lived in England, and I knew a couple of people that were here. I mean, there was magically. I think this happens when we follow the voice and the calling.
Hmm.
Magically, things happen. Big
Yes.
magic starts happening, and one of the pieces of magic that happened was there was a young man who was on the training with me who came from Cape Town, and he'd been in England for about 11 years, and he decided to come back to Cape Town because his parents were getting older and ill, and he wanted to see them. And he kind of that gave me the courage to think, okay, I do know one person, and they're going to pick me up from the airport. And then, right at the very last minute, I met up with a friend of mine who's English, but he lives in Australia. And we
Right.
met up in London. And he said to me, my sister's got a friend who lives in Cape Town. I said, oh, okay, thank you. And he said, I'll give you her email address.
Nice.
So she ended up finding me a place to live. And then I left in October, and in June, I was on a spiritual trip with Dr. J.J. Hurtak, who brought through the
Right.
Keys of Enoch, which is one of the things that I
Yes.
study and teach. And he was
Yes.
in the Hurtaks, Desiree and Dr. J.J. Hurtak, both of them were in England, and they were going to do a whole spiritual thing around Glastonbury and also Stonehenge. And there were
Mm.
crop circles as well. And I got in my car and drove down there to be with them. And there was a woman there from South Africa, from Cape Town. And they introduced me to her, and I still know her today. And then literally at the 11th hour, 3 weeks before I left, I'd booked my flights. You wouldn't believe, I was thinking, this is the craziest thing I've ever done. My heart was beating. I was having palpitations. I was thinking, this is utterly suicidal. I've given up my job, and now I'm going to give up my flat and rent it out. And I'm throwing away about 80% of what I own. But I just
Ooh.
kept being guided to do it. And
Yeah.
I had to say, does this stuff work? Is this true? And I will never know if it's true or not unless I take this leap of faith and I have the courage to do it. And while I was panicking and trying to, get rid of
Yeah.
stuff from my flat,
Yeah.
a friend of mine, or so not even a friend, an acquaintance, said, she'd met me on some other spiritual course that I'd done, because I've been doing these spiritual courses for years and years, and you get to know people, hey? And
That's right.
she said to me, it was on Facebook actually, she said, I hear you, because I posted on Facebook, only 3 weeks to go and I'm going to South Africa.
Yeah.
And she said, hey, I know a friend of mine's in South Africa, I'll put you in touch with her. And she was an
Yay.
English lady, and she was
Oh.
married to a South African, and she was here, and she was my angel in Cape Town when I arrived. She was the one who gave me the map book so I wouldn't get lost. She was the one that gave me a blanket because it was actually quite cold. I thought it was going to be hot because it was Africa and it was
Yeah.
cold. So she was wonderful, and I'm still friends with her today, but she's actually now living in England. So her and
Oh,
her
that's too
South African
funny.
husband are living in England. So
Ah.
yeah. So that brings me to South Africa, and then the magic continues. So I actually
Wow.
let go of being a therapist completely. I said, no,
Yes.
that's part of my London life. And I started to coach people to work with their intuition the way that I had, and how to create what you love, and not really manifest. I mean, manifestation is part of it, but we have to take action as well. So it's to create and manifest your best life, your soul purpose, what you're here to do. So I started doing that, coached my children to do it. They're living amazing, extraordinary lives. I ended up
Nice.
meeting my husband, my now husband, who's beautiful and lovely and wonderful, and built this house where I'm living now, right up by the ocean. And
Oh.
also wrote a book, a fiction called Red Dress. And from that, I've ended up in 2018 teaching a course called the Bone Circle. I created it completely, and it
Yeah.
draws in many, many things. So it draws on a lot of that spiritual journey that I had, and the healing and all of that stuff, and being fully present, and yoga and meditation and all kinds of stuff around spiritual practice. and raising awareness, raising consciousness, connecting with your soul, using intuition, all of those things, drinking water, eating healthy, all of these things. So there's that part, and then it also draws on my life as a therapist and a healer, because we always do have stuff that we have to heal and resolve and let go of. And it also draws on all this stuff as intuition. So it's about also tapping at will into your intuition to receive your gift of life, which is the life you're here to really live, your true life that uses all your skills and talents, your best, most beautiful, truest, most sparkling, wonderful life. It's not all going to be rainbows and unicorns, because as you know, we have challenges to grow, but it's how to create that. So that's what the bone circle is. So that's me, I think, in a nutshell. And I'm sorry that's been a rather long answer, but I wanted to try and kind of weave in these different parts of me, so you kind of get a bit of a feeling of who I am and what I've done and where I've been.
I think it's wonderful. It was perfectly said, and you established your transparent self, your authentic self with us, and you bared your soul, so to speak. So no, you did. This is fantastic. I found it fascinating to listen to you telling your story. So thank you for that. Like, I mean, during these times that we've been going through the last 3 years, in the spiritual circles, they've dubbed it the Great Awakening, hence the Great Awakening podcast, where I bring on heart-centered individuals to share their knowledge and their practices, as well as their services, to show the world that there are other means to assist them through this challenging times that we've been going through. And through these times, I mean, you've had, I'm sure, your own epiphanies, if you will. What would you recommend the audience, or if people were to ask you, how can I navigate these difficult times? How can I help myself more to become the best version of myself through these difficult times?
Thank you. That's a great question. And also just want to say thank you, Giselle, because you're really doing some beautiful service work here by bringing this together and informing people. And it's a point where people can come to get that information and get reassurance. So I just want to say thank you to you as well, and for shining your light. And actually, it's one of the things that does keep us going. We have to start working together in community, because we are going, as we go through the Great Awakening, there are also challenges. So it's basically, as we awaken and we're raising our vibration and going up and being heart-led and heart-centered and creating something better, we're basically creating a new world, a much better paradigm. But as that's happening, the other side's going down like this, because it's like a seesaw. It has to be in balance. So we've got also a lot of challenging things, and I think there's going to be even more challenging things that are going to come out that we haven't even seen yet. In fact, I know there will be. So one of the things that keeps us strong is to work together and be with like-minded people. So even just listening to this kind of podcast, following other people that you like, that resonate with you, and finding some like-minded people around. I used to do light worker meetings years ago when I was in London, and we used to get together on the last Friday of the month at 7 o'clock, and everybody would pitch up at my house, and we'd do light worker meetings, and we'd do prayers, and we'd we'd space clear, and we'd call in angels, and we'd do planetary healing, and we'd talk about things, because sometimes you can't talk to normal people because they think you're crazy. Hey, people think you're crazy, so you've got to have your like-minded friends out there and people that you connect with. And look, we're so blessed now because we have things like Zoom. I'm sitting in the bottom of Africa, the very tip of Africa, and you're sitting in Canada, and we can still talk. It's morning for you and it's evening for me, but we can talk. So you can find your group of people. So that's one of the things that's going to keep you in the right vibration and resonance, because we're all going to get upset sometimes by what's happening as the news comes out. It is upsetting, and that's going to knock us off balance, and we need our group of people to support us. So that's huge. This is where we're going towards unity consciousness, because as we go into oneness, we go into unity and oneness, but it starts with fellowship or sisterhood. It starts with community. It starts with being a greater family of light.
Mhm.
And also, we can't all do it all. We've all got different skills, and we're like different facets of one jewel. So
Mhm.
or if you think of even a football team, you can't all be a soccer team. You
It's
can't all be the
okay.
goalkeeper. English, you see, can't all be the goalkeeper, but somebody has to be the attack and somebody has to be the defense. Or if you think about chefs in a kitchen, they can't all make the bread. Somebody's got to make
Yeah.
the cake, somebody's got to make the fish dish, somebody's got to make the vegetables, somebody's got to wash up. So they're
Right.
all important roles, and we all have important roles. And when we work together in community and in unity, the sum of the whole is greater than the parts, and we create something huge. So that's one
Yes.
thing. And I think the other thing as we go through the Great Awakening is to remain heart centered. It's just to remain
Mhm.
heart centered,
Yes.
and to find a spiritual practice that works for you. Now, we're all
Yes.
different and we're all
Mhm.
resonate at different frequencies, and we've all got
Mhm.
different interests. And,
Yes.
some people love angel cards and some people think they're terrible. Some
Yeah.
people, some people like to do yoga and some people hate that. Some people like doing Wim Hof and sitting in an ice bath, and some people think that's ridiculous. So we're all different, and some people like
Mhm.
qigong, and some people like tai chi, some people just like walking in nature, some people like swimming. So
That's
we're
it.
all different. So you've got to look at what your strengths are, what your
Mhm.
passions are, what
Mhm.
you love, which isn't selfish, because when we do what we love, invariably we're in service to the world, because when we are all
Mhm.
connected, you, other people, and the world are all connected. So
Mhm.
whether you do something for the world, or you do something for other people, or you do it for yourself, you're making a difference to the whole, as long as it's heart led. And often the heart led thing we do is serving other people. So you obviously love doing this Great Awakening podcast, otherwise you wouldn't do it. But it's serving other people. And I love
Yes.
writing, and I love
Mhm.
teaching the Bow Circle, and I love teaching. I love this spiritual work, and it serves others.
Mhm.
So do find your own spiritual practice.
Mhm.
There's a line in my book Red Dress which talks about how we're all fish. We're like fish swimming in crystal waters, making our way back home to the light. And sometimes we meet with other people, and sometimes we swim alone and then meet other people, and we're different points along that stream of crystal waters. We
Mhm.
meet up with gurus, or we go on different teachings, or we might read some book, but we're all in it together, making our
Mhm.
way up these crystal waters. So yeah, we've got to follow the heart, and also don't become discouraged, because we are
Mhm.
not alone. That's the other thing. When we work together collectively as a family of light, we can help and support one another. But also upstairs, as I like to call it, is also helping us. We are not alone. So a
Mhm.
lot of people say we're the ones we've been waiting for.
Mhm.
When we are and we're not, we've got to awaken, the Great
Mhm.
Awakening. We've got to do our part, but we are not alone. And there
Mhm.
is a hierarchy, a divine hierarchy.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I hope that didn't ping. That's a little noise on my computer. There's a divine hierarchy that are
Mhm.
also coming to help us. And
Yes.
as things get crazy, they will start to appear. In fact, they've
Yes.
already started appearing. People have already started seeing orbs and
Yes.
working with extra celestials, we would call those, or extra ultra terrestrials, which would be angelics,
Yes.
or higher self. And these are um, benign and loving, kind
Mhm.
beings, for
Mhm.
want of a better word, because that are coming
Yes.
to help us. So we have to
Absolutely.
also connect with them. So
Mhm.
what I do a lot to keep me in alignment and in that right vibration of frequencies, I work a lot with divine names, divine holy names and holy mantras,
Mhm.
because it keeps that resonance and it keeps that connection. And I teach
Yes.
that in the Bone Circle as well, to work with these names, because they protect us as well. Because
Oh,
not
yes.
only are the goodies coming, but there's the fallen as well. There's the
Uh-huh.
ones that limit us. There's the ones that are not going to be good, and we really, really have to have discernment as to who we're working with. And so when
Yes.
we're starting to work on different dimensions and levels, and we're
Yes.
starting to tap into higher realities, we have to be discerning about what we're tapping into, what we're connecting with.
Very, very
Mm.
much so. Totally agree on that. That was so well said. Thank you so much for that advice. I'm sure that not only for myself, but I think it's going to be very valuable from this moment going forward. Bridget, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to put all of your information in the information below with the description so that people who resonate with you today, they can reach out to you on your website, and the other information about your book and so forth will be there as well. So thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so grateful. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much. It's been my absolute pleasure and honour. Thank you for inviting me. I'm truly grateful and appreciate it.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.